Hi, everybody. Welcome to the backstory. Our intent today is to give you a podcast that will allow us to kind of fill in some of the backstory behind the stories that you don't generally see in the news. We have a lot of information here. We're going to try and cover as much as we can over our time together. Today, I do have a very good friend, Pat Moran, who's a journalist in North Carolina, who's actually seen a lot of this stuff firsthand and been involved with a lot of the things we're going to talk about today, because today we're actually going to talk about news, the news stations, news, how we get news, how it kind of evolved and so forth. But anyway, I want to welcome Pat back. Welcome, Pat. Glad you're here.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me.
You bet. You bet. So you're a journalist there. You've done all sorts of work in different areas of journalism, from what I understand, if that's correct. So,
yes. So I currently work for a newspaper. I've worked in newspapers previously, and until recently, I worked at a TV station. There was sort of a massive layoff, staff reduction, they call it. So I've kind of seen it from both the print and then from the TV side. Very different, subtly different approaches, but still very different approaches.
Interesting.
How they approach stories. Yeah.
Fascinating. So anyway, I wanted to kind of bring that back a little bit, because the group has shown me several things, be it when I'm watching news or something, they'll say, well, this is because of this, or this is because of this. And I never really get a chance to kind of bring some of that forward. So I'm looking forward to this today, to kind of talk a little bit about some of the things here and get your opinion on some of the things the group says, and see what you say about a lot of it. But interesting, we're in a fascinating situation. And this whole podcast, by the way, was originally designed to help show us how much money influences our daily lives. And you're really going to see it here when we talk about news today, because the news thing is just fascinating.
Well, so except at the very inception of broadcast news, money has been in it for forever. I think people don't realize how it subtly affects what is pushed forward. Sometimes people think it's going to be just a one-on-one correlation. If there's this sponsor, you're going to do a favorable story that's favorable to this business. And it doesn't quite work like that. It's more like, people are making, they're making an examination. They're coming up with what they think will sell best for their demo. I know this is nothing new. It's just got much more precise.
No, but it's unbelievable what's taken place with it all now. And correct me if I'm wrong about this, but the history, like you said, in the very beginning, when the FCC started issuing licenses for television stations, and when I grew up, there was only 3 stations. There was ABC, right, CBS, and NBC. That was it. So we had a dial.
PBS. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a dial with 12 different dials on it. We always wondered what those other ones were for. Now we have hundreds of stations that we can, absolutely right. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. But in the beginning, when they issued the FCC licenses, the whole idea of news was a public service. And correct, they actually had laws that said you could not charge for news. You were required to fulfill your FCC license. You were required to have a news brief every, I forgot what it was, half hour, whatever it was, for 5 minutes. And
it was short.
Yeah, real short ones. And then they altered that because they said, well, we've got more news to bring in, so we need to bring in more news. So we're going to develop the story a little bit, and we're going to instead of doing every half hour or 5 minutes, we're going to give you 20 minutes every 2 hours or whatever it was. And they were able to negotiate that with the law to be able to change some of those things. But it was really, yeah, well, and what took place was, the broadcasters lobbied Congress. It's the same thing. You're going to hear, in this podcast, you're going to hear a lot about lobbying, because it's where the money goes to make itself heard, basically, in our law system, in our system of government. It's really kind of interesting, because as much as I detest lobbyists in these ways, and the whole idea of lobbyists, I have a cousin who's a lobbyist. I have people that have been doing this for a long time. And the people in Washington say that they wouldn't be able to do their work if it wasn't for the lobbyists, because the lobbyists bring them all their stuff. So anyway, we've got ourselves wrapped up in this whole how much money can we pay thing. And what happened with news, of course, is they started accepting news, and they brought the lobbyists to Washington. They changed the rules to where they could actually bring in advertisers. And we see this, we saw our news change pretty drastically. It's really interesting to see what happened.
It's, I mean, nowadays, I think most people, they don't know anything except this news ecosystem.
Right.
That how, and, but it is kind of a step-by-step thing. I mean, once you established, a 30-minute newscast, and once you began to get sponsors for it, and it was the big money sponsors, and that didn't change for a long time. Right. The automotive sponsor, the big appliances, and, home loans, and, what have you. I mean, that got established early on. By the 60s, that's kind of in base. And we haven't really seen it. We've just seen it grow more sophisticated.
Well, that's the interesting thing. We're starting to run into all sorts of rules and other things that are taking place right now. We had a lawsuit not too long ago with Fox News, which really opened up a lot for me. It opened up a lot of my understanding of what was actually taking place and how it was taking place and what was going on with that. So it was really an interesting process to see. But let me kind of recap what I saw, and you can correct me if you see anything incorrect about it. And I don't pretend to be an expert at it, but it really answered a lot of questions to me.
It was a big story.
Yeah,
big news story.
Well, I saw Fox News, a major news station. Actually, at the beginning, when it first started doing this, it was number one. It was the number one news station in the United States, and it had gone in a different direction. And of course, when the 2020 election happened and Trump claimed that he was actually the winner of that, Fox News got behind him, and they actually. The individuals, not Fox News as a conglomerate. They did not come together and say, we're going in this direction. What happened
interestingly, that initially there were newscasters on Fox that they called Arizona for Joe Biden. I mean, they were basically, there's always been a slant for Fox and claims there's a slant on their stations, but they were doing their job. They were the news. But then you saw that somebody made the decision, back off from this truth that you reported.
Right.
Keep under a lid. So it's interesting to see that happen.
Well, it was really interesting for me to see the timing of it, too, because what was happening was that Dominion Voting Systems had a lawsuit against Fox News for $1 billion. They ended up getting $787 million, which is just a little shy of the billion, but they ended up doing it. And they did so because Rupert Murdoch did not want his people to take the stand. If they took the stand, they would have to tell the truth. They would be a whole can of worms that opened up at that point, because in truth, I don't think anybody at Fox News ever believed that Trump won the election. They were getting behind it because it was big money. Real simple.
It was, it actually was. This case, it was better to do the payout than get these people, on record. But even that said, even before that, they did have testimony. They did have recordings of people at Fox on record saying that, we're not telling the truth.
Correct.
We're lying. So, so that cat was already out of the bag. It's just that Rupert Murdoch didn't want to have a whole bag of cats.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of stuff there, but during that whole process, and I can't remember if it was actually Rupert Murdoch taking the stage or taking being interviewed. I don't know if it was an interview after or if it was actually part of the trial. I can't remember, but he told a story, and to me, it made all the sense in the world as to what happened. He had his people, because he's in charge, but he wasn't actively in charge, but he was in charge of Fox News. He sold off Fox several years ago, but kept the news stations because he owns news stations all over the globe. and really has a huge influence for an Australian, has a huge influence on the globe because of these news stations.
Oh, yeah.
And
He started with papers. He brought up
and
newspapers.
Exactly. So he's got this whole area here. But what took place was he's told a story. He said what happened was, in the beginning, when these players started embellishing these stories, I don't want to call them lies, because I realize some of the people that may be listening to this may be on that side, may think that it's the case. But what he told was his story. He said, I was going to call it in. He said, basically, I was going to call it stops. I was going to call in and make sure that they stopped telling those lies. I was going to call it in, and I did. And the interesting thing that happened was, for a short time, they went after Trump, and Trump became the bad guy on Fox News. A very interesting thing happened at that moment. That's when One American News got a hold, and Newsmax. They opened up their stuff. They went completely extreme right-wing with the whole thing, much further than Fox News did, and Fox News numbers went down drastically.
There was a market there. Now it was an underserved market.
Exactly.
And it's saying that, so Murdoch could go on record and say this, and they're basically admitting to criminality.
Sure.
And I don't know if there was a Jon Stewart on The Daily Show.
Oh, I know Jon Stewart well, yeah.
Yeah, and so he was showing an excerpt, and it was something different. It was financial crimes. It was somebody coming on saying that the fraud that Donald Trump committed in real estate and in falsely valuing his properties,
right.
Basically what he has been found guilty of in an earlier trial in New York, that this guy was a financial guy, and he said, so what? We all do it, And then Stewart says, he was being sarcastic. He says, it's a very little known fact that if you do something illegal and a bunch of people do it and they're all your friends, all of a sudden it's okay.
Right.
So they're basically getting back to what Murdoch said. He was admitting to doing something illegal, but it's kind of what happened to that. Everybody goes, yeah, well, he does illegal things.
Exactly.
But that's it. So,
well, now they're up at a whole different situation too, because they've got another one now, Smartmatic, which is another voting system, has also filed suit on them for $2.7 billion. So it's almost 3 times the amount that Dominion voting systems went after them for. And they're filing all these claims and so forth to be able to get out of it. And Fox News is really good at getting out of claims. For years, they got out of lawsuits by saying that we're not a news station. That was another thing. They're officially
legally entertainment.
A what? What was it?
They are officially legally entertainment.
Entertainment, yeah. That they basically said they were news protagonists, to basically poke holes in anything they could and attack anything they could, and they got away with that, even though news is very clearly in their name. So yeah,
right. It's like we're historical fiction.
Exactly. Exactly.
And there's a similar thing back when Tucker Carlson was on Fox, and I forget exactly how it was worded, but they said, well, this was the defense. The defense is, so he's so outrageous that only a person not in command of their faculties would believe him. This is their defense.
I know. I know.
I think it's brazenness counts. At this point, if you've got money and you're brazen, you get a free pass. There was a little snafu about NBC and hiring. This has probably been in and out of the news cycle so quickly, but it was the ex-RNC chairperson, Ronna McDaniel,
right,
who is related to Mitt Romney, but she won't admit it as Romney's.
Oh, I didn't know that. Right? I didn't know she was related to Mitt. Okay, cool. And she was hired by.
That's not a predict.
She was hired by NBC News.
Yeah, to be a commentator on NBC and MSNBC, and all of the anchors on both of those stations said, wait a minute. She was actively involved with Trump trying to commit fraud in the voting. She was on the phone with the Secretary of State in Georgia saying,
Right.
give me those X amount of votes. She has been actively and still is actively pushing the narrative that the last election was crooked. And the idea is just to erode people's faith and belief that our system works.
That's
that all the elections still work. And that is a harbinger to fascism. The first thing you got to say is none of this works anyway. And in fact, let's get all this democracy, just push it aside and let a real strong man step in and take care of things.
Right.
And I kind of right there paraphrased what Rachel Maddow said, because she came on.
Well, Rachel Maddow, she went after, she worked for NBC, and she went after NBC for that. She literally, I couldn't believe that she was doing that. And today there's both sides of that. NBC came back and said, well, we want to offer both sides. And although she was extreme, we all knew that. And she apparently has changed her tune since then.
So they say.
Yeah, so they say. So she says. So anyway, it was still interesting situation.
That narrative, though.
Yeah.
I mean, Ronna McDaniel is still aiding Trump in saying the election was fake.
Right.
And that is, as Maddow said, and I agree with her, a direct attack on our way of government.
It is. Absolutely is.
It is meant to undermine, people have to buy into a government, a financial system in order for it to work. And if you can discredit it, knock out the support for it,
right?
Then you can step in with a strong man. And we've all these strong men throughout history,
and we see it. We see it taking place globally right now, which is another interesting point, because I do want to bring this up. We've talked about this before in previous podcasts, but I really want to bring this up because this just makes so much sense for me with what's happening. We're seeing people go for populism. We're seeing people go for the strong man that wants to come in and take over and make everything right and fix everything, and only his way will work type of thing.
Right.
And we're seeing this happen globally, which is a really interesting situation. So I was very curious as to what's causing that. What is taking place that causes people to reach that level to where they will bring in strong men because they want to see some change, or they'll vote for somebody like Trump or for any of the strong men that have come in all over the globe, that will vote for it just because they want to see change, because they're tired of what's going on. They want to see shifting going on. My guess,
go ahead.
From what I've seen, is that largely this has to do with the wealth gap. And we've talked about this before, but this is a huge piece for me, because it just makes so much sense that when people get squeezed, they're working full time and they still can't pay their bills, they're still having difficulty with that. They want to see change, plain and simple. The pressure's on them. They want to see change. They want to see shifting. And that brings along populist people like Netanyahu, like Trump, like different people.
Viktor Orban,
Viktor Orban, perfect.
For instance.
Absolutely.
But it is interesting that the wealth gap creates this dissatisfaction. But we have a lot of people that respond to this, and they're responding to a narrative. And I'll take us back a few years.
Yeah.
People are becoming aware of climate change.
Finally.
And well, this is a few ago. So I was talking with some people, and they were in Indiana. I'm in North Carolina. I was acquainted with them. They were convinced that climate change was a hoax, and that their banner headline is "Follow the money." Belief was at universities and scientific think tanks that the scientists were faking all of this so they could get grants and make hundreds. Okay, follow the money. They're making hundreds on these fake grants. And I just waited, without even thinking about this, and I got a lot of people angry at me. I said, if it's follow the money, look at the billions that the fossil fuel industry will make by lying about it. And they've lied before. They've lied. This industry lied about the
over
cigarettes.
and over again. That's correct.
How long are you going to repeat this cycle? So do see people that are disaffected by the wealth gap, but then they're turning around and supporting the people whose policies exacerbate the wealth gap.
Who created the wealth gap in the first place? That's right.
Time after time. Okay, here's another thing. This is a minor thing in North Carolina that Duke Energy is like they control. We're Duke Energy's plantation as far as when it comes to fossil fuels and energy. They are getting the laws changed on home solar. So it used to be that you put up solar panels and you not only power your own house, but you have some extra that you sell back to the grid.
Correct.
And so there was an X amount of money that people got as the credit selling back to the grid. Successfully passed laws by supporting 100% Republican politicians that credit that you get selling back from the grid is being reduced to almost nothing.
Right.
So it's going to disincentivize solar because Duke doesn't want solar because they are fossil fuel. And so this is just one of these things that's going on. And it happens time and time again.
It does.
So it isn't
about money.
So it isn't.
That's correct.
Isn't that evidence matters that, hey, these people you support are the people that are putting the boot heel down on you. But instead it's this narrative that there are these liberals wasting money. They're doing scientific study on sea turtles, and they'll get outraged about that, for instance. But they're talking at the most hundreds of thousands versus the billions and billions.
Correct.
The industries that are, cutting down on solar, exacerbating climate change, etc. There's where I have kind of come into the picture is, so I work for a paper which I would say is more progressive, but I worked for a station which is very much middle of the road. It's right down the middle. And I think I see, and this again is talking like affiliates and not at the network level in New York or Washington, is that the stations that are down the middle don't pick up on when the narrative has changed. They don't pick up when the model has changed. And I'll give you an example.
Yeah, tell me.
So we were talking, we were covering a lot of school board meetings and people using holy heck at school board meetings. I don't want my children reading these terrible books about LGBT people. I don't want them wearing masks. Masks is against, my liberties. And but disrupting the school meetings. And it was accepted that, well, I'm easy county with a crazy school board. And so we're doing stories about this. They really picked up during the pandemic and the lockdown.
Right.
So I come across, and I should say that my job point is to the news. So I'm sitting in on the news meetings to see what they're talking about, what will likely be the story they will tease. So I'm not in news. And
for the newspaper or for the TV station?
For the TV station.
Gotcha.
And I did more news for the paper, but I was strictly the promotions guy. And so they're talking about this, and I'm thinking, well, I mean, what do I want the promotions guy? These people news, they know what's going on. But in the meantime, I had read some newspaper articles which talked about the beginning, like the nascent beginning of Moms for Liberty. And basically, Moms for Liberty, it was indeed two moms at the beginning. One of those moms was married to the head of the Republican Party in Florida, was very much involved in party politics, and they decided to push a narrative that could stir the base and stir up the base about education. And so they began almost like by franchising. Moms for Liberty began sending, people to other markets to complain at at these school board meetings. And you got people that were raising these strongly worded and passionate complaints that didn't even have kids attending the
No
schools,
kids. Yeah,
that didn't even live in those states.
that's correct.
And then if you look at a lot of the book banning, when people called in and complained about books, at one point it boiled down to 13 entities
Really?
across the entire United States.
Oh my God, that's amazing. I didn't realize that.
And so this was a top-down, it was not grassroots, it was AstroTurf, top-down thing, where let's go and raise all of these school districts and and it was a very good fundraiser for candidates they supported.
Amazing.
So it was successful. So I brought it up, and my news director dismissed it, and didn't dismiss it because he was on the other side of me politically. It was just that was in his wheelhouse, that there would be a top-down, more or less fraud to push this narrative.
Right.
It's just, no, these are what people genuinely think in these school districts. And some of them did once they were agitated to do so. But initially, no, it wasn't people from those school districts.
Right.
But he thought he's the promo guy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But the top anchor at the station said, no, this is true. And she started talking about Moms for Liberty and what they were.
Right.
Flash forward a few years later, and then there's this huge sex scandal that the founders of Moms for Liberty are involved in. And it isn't so much, it's racy.
Yeah.
It's threesomes, it's et cetera. But the point wasn't so much that they were involved in these activities, is that there was some same-sex interaction in these threesomes. And they were crying books that talked about
gays. Yes. Right.
Yeah. So it was rampant hypocrisy. It became very clear that this was just an engine.
Right.
These weren't even their beliefs. This was an engine to stir up controversy,
Correct.
to make money, and to support their style. So people have begun to wise up to this. But initially, I think the news business, particularly in mid-range small markets, they weren't equipped to deal with it. They took it at face value.
Took it at face
Now
value.
they're learning.
Because everybody's talking about it.
You can't.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. But they took this as a grassroots thing when it was not.
Wow.
So it is interesting to see, I would say in general, how the middle of the road, how the trying to give by both siding,
Right.
every position, every argument, they're failing in their mission because they're not seeing reality.
Correct.
There was a recent snafu, once again at NBC, where it is the woman who anchors Meet the Press, and she talked briefly about how Trump is telling his followers to threaten a judge and the judge's daughter.
The daughter
in one of the cases. And then her conclusion is, well, we're a deeply divided country. And it's like, no, that's not the conclusion. We are a democracy under attack. Correct. And so when you soft pedal this to something innocuous, you're also doing a disservice. You're not telling the truth.
And we're seeing so much influence come in from other countries. We're seeing Russia, We're seeing China, we're seeing all these other countries coming after us in different ways, and they're coming after us with memes, with social media posts, with things that make it look like we are talking about it. But yeah, this is getting rather interesting coming up, and with the use of AI and everything coming up too, this is going to be a wild year. Absolutely.
Nobody is ready for AI, and it's and so I work in a paper, and the policy is no AI.
Good.
Yeah, for anything, no AI for an email. Yeah.
Good.
And I think that is, it's not being a Luddite. It is, if we can pause technology long enough
down, right,
so that we can craft balance. And now, back in our history, we pause television to craft a response. Now, as we both talked about, the wayside, but there was never even, starting with cable news, where the fairness doctrine that applied to broadcast didn't apply to cable news.
Correct.
A lot of the rules didn't apply to cable news. They should have.
Should have, absolutely.
Maybe modify them, but they should have. There should be a pause with any new technology, because new technology brings boon. New technology opens up new vistas. New technology is a miracle. New technology is also hell on earth.
It is. It is.
And it depends on how we deal. And when we renege on our responsibility to pause it, look at it, and craft a policy, which we know is going to have to change over time.
Yes, it does eventually.
We do that.
You're right. It does eventually.
Yeah. But we need that. And it's not an intellectual problem. There isn't the political will. Wait a minute. What are the pros? What are the cons? How is it going to work? The guy is going to do amazing things in video. I tell you, it has done amazing things because you just type in whatever video you want,
right,
and boom, you have it.
Correct.
And it'll be interesting to see a few years down the road how people reply to it, because nowadays, and I'm talking just entertainment, movies, and television, there's a backlash to CGI. People really respond to things done in camera because there's a weight, there's a realness, there's a gravitas to that CGI no longer has, which, it looks too video game-ish. The Oppenheimer used no CGI.
There's several directors that are doing exactly that. There's several directors that are actually going back to using the cameras of the 70s to give it that old look, because it's a different look when you film at 23 frames a second versus 29.6. Yeah. It's a different feeling in general. So they're going back to the nostalgia way of doing things, and they're trying to get away from using CGI altogether.
And people are responding to that. Yes. So are we going to get to a point when AI is ubiquitous?
I hope
where just the audience will go, well, this is AI.
Well, and that's the difficult part, because it's so good.
They get sophisticated.
It's so good and so sophisticated that it's really difficult to tell. I have my girlfriend's a high school teacher, and I said, boy, this must be a real problem for you with, having your students use AI all the time. You're not going to necessarily know what they know and what they don't know. And she says, well, it's not a problem so far. She said, because I know my students, and I know when they hand in something that's beyond their knowledge, I know I can ask them 2 questions right there and find out whether it was AI or, anything about it. So very simple to do. Anyway, she's not nearly worried about it as I am, but I think it's going to, and the problem with AI is it learns. So every time you correct it somewhere, it knows that next time it's going to get smarter all the time. And now I just saw the other day where NVIDIA has released a new chip. And it's a computer chip, which NVIDIA usually was in video and audio. They weren't into actually making computer chips for computers. But now they are. They're making processors, and they're making them with AI in them. And right now, if you want to use AI, you have to go to the internet. Real simple.
Right.
It's not possible for you to do. You don't have a machine that will run AI for you. You will pretty soon.
It's going to be bundled.
It's going to be bundled
with your device. It'll
be bundled, and it'll learn. It'll learn from you. One of the biggest challenge I have all these when I do an event or something that's going out and is going to be put up on the website. We put captions in it. So what happens is I have to go through. They never understand the word espavo. They always, always get it wrong. They translate it all these different ways and so forth. But when we have AI, it will learn, and it'll know. And furthermore, it could even go further than that if I wanted it to. It could probably even give me ideas for the next one, or how to extend the message on this, or something else that, you would never think was possible. Now all these things are right in front of us. And we're going to be doing catch up for quite some time with the laws. The laws are not up to date here, and the technology is moving so fast that somewhere along the line, I don't know where it came from, but somewhere along the line, we passed a law or decided to eliminate a law that said that you are responsible for things on your website. You're not.
Right. Now, but that I think is the key with, I mean, we do this with, with social media giants.
Right.
Is that they are not responsible for policing.
That's correct.
Their turf, because they say, it's a forum. I'm just provide forum, but they're not. They're collecting your data. They're making money. It's not an open forum. I think I made this argument before. Yeah. It's a box in the middle of a busy gate. It's the hall that they own that you're paying admission to get into the hall.
Good way
by giving them your data. By you being the product, then you get in. So they're making money, and it's their it's their gig. It's the crib. They own it. So they're responsible. And so I think we've got to kind of retrofit laws to do that, which has been done. You go back to the Sherman Antitrust Act,
right?
Which is, it wasn't in place before. It was just like, oh my gosh, these robber barons are getting out of hand. These companies are going out of hand. We're going to reel them in. So, and I can't remember the last time anybody's invoked the Sherman Antitrust Act.
It's been a long time.
For anything.
No, we don't.
But,
we don't do.
We do have.
If we did antitrust, if we actually followed the rules, we wouldn't have a Facebook. We wouldn't have all those companies. They'd be split up into smaller companies, the same way that we broke up AT&T a long time ago.
And they'd be competing, and they'd have to offer better service. They couldn't be the dumpster fire that
Correct.
Twitter is, for instance. As far as just service. And we're supposed to be about the competition of the free market, and we're what is it that you and I, we're not rich, so we're rugged individualists, but multi-billionaires, we have to support them. Their welfare. They're on welfare.
Absolutely fascinating to see that. I was just completely blown away when Trump got into when he got into the office, and he immediately gave a tax deduction to people, and he told everybody they were all going to get a tax deduction. Nobody got tax deductions down here. All that money went up here. All that money went up into the upper echelons and made the rich richer. So he contributed greatly to the wealth gap. Yeah. At the same time, he was telling people, I was having a conversation with my son about this, and my son didn't believe me. Real simple. He says, no, Dad, that's not true. And you watch the news, that's for us. We're getting a tax deduction.
Nope.
6 months later, when he did his taxes, he found out, but it took him a while. Yeah. But
mine actually went up a bit that year.
Did they really?
Because I didn't make any money.
And so did his. Mine didn't, but his did. Yes, you're right.
So it was, but that tax plan is still in effect, and whatever meager tax break that's still in the lower brackets it's going to sunset, but not for brackets.
Not for the top brackets. That's correct.
Yeah, and it's so immediately, like you widening the wealth gap, and then just our deficit spending went insane.
Yes.
And
still is.
And a lot of it is this double dipping that he and his family did. That CIA agents had to pay to stay at one of his properties, and he just found a way to double dip everything.
That's right.
And people said he doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't know how to be president. It's like, well, he's not worried about that.
He's not worried about it. He's not trying to be president. He's trying to be Donald Trump.
He's worried about
That's correct.
What goes into his pocket.
That's correct.
But, so this kind of back to sort of, the appeal of the strongman, which is a narrative that gets pitched a lot, which is, this will take care of all your problems.
Right.
And it's seductive and it's emotional. So that's why it's super seductive. But if you look at history's strongmen, this is a weird thing to set aside, but even setting lack of human rights or fascism aside, which is a big thing
That's a big
aside,
thing, right?
that they aren't good at running the countries that they become.
That's absolutely true.
They're a disaster. Stalin did agricultural reform that reduced grain yields and killed millions.
Yep.
The uprooted communities and sent them to Siberia and said, they'll be fine. Give them a tractor, they'll be fine. But all of these things did. I mean, thankfully, Hitler wasn't very good at being a general.
That's
and
true.
he decided he knew better than all the generals. And thank goodness he stepped in terrible decisions.
I've heard that before.
So Mussolini was going to make the trains run on time. Guess what? The trains didn't run on time. That's one of the that's one of the lessons of the strongman. But I digress. But
interesting, fascinating. I'd like to keep this going, but we're out of time here for this one. But I do appreciate you coming and joining us here, Pat. Great job today. Thank you for being part of this. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Steve. It's been fun.
All right, Espavo, everybody. Thanks for being with us here. We'll be back with more from the backstory coming up very soon. Espavo.